Hello, I'm Chris Gunness, and I'm with you for the launch of a new, and I'm told, incredibly important book. It's called Palestinian Refugees in International Law. It's by Francesca Albanese and Lex Tackenberg, both of whom used to work with the UN body UNRWA, whose job it is to give aid and support to Palestinian refugees across the Middle East. Full disclosure, they are both old friends and colleagues of mine, but I promise to give them a run for their money. So let me begin with a cynical question. It's a very comprehensive book. Can you please summarize it in a couple of lively headlines for me? Lex, you first of all.
In essence, the book is a completely rewritten and greatly expanded second edition of my first book of 1998, The Status of Palestinian Refugees in International Law. Francesca, as you were the principal author for the new edition, why don't you give a quick overview of what's in the book?
Sure. Thank you very much, Chris, for this opportunity. So in essence, the book, in our view, brings much needed clarity on what is the most unique, old and complex refugee situation in the world, and one which is often forgotten in any discussions on refugees or simply misrepresented. Our book provides a comprehensive overview of the Palestinian refugee question, I would say, as a whole, unpacking two key dimensions of it. One is more historical and factual, because we look at the events that led to the mass displacement of Palestinian refugees, both in 1947-49 and in 1967. And this excursus is important not only to understand who Palestinian refugees are, where they come from, what was the law back then, but also to capture the elements of continuity between the original displacement and present-day reality. And also we look at the Palestinian dispersal, how it has evolved. The Palestinian refugees now are in over 50 countries, not only in the Middle East, but in Europe, in the Americas, and increasingly in the Asia Pacific and in Africa. And this, the growth of this dispersal reflects the lack of resolve and the protection challenges they continue to face. The second dimension is humanitarian and political, and it looks at the responses that have been offered to address the Palestinian refugee situation. And we look at why Palestinian refugees are served and protected by UN agencies other than UNHCR. Why they are so different, if they are, from other refugees. Are they legitimate refugees? Yes, they are. Why? And we also look at how the question has been negotiated under the UN first, until the 50s, and then through the Middle East peace process that started in the 90s. And I'm sorry to say, but the Palestinian refugee question has become a footnote to a failing and fading Middle East peace process centered on advancing Palestinian statehood, in rhetorics more than in practice, I would say, and where the Palestinian refugee question is treated as a nuisance at best. So we do analyze the question through the prism of international law, and not only because we are boring lawyers, but also because this provides, this compass provides for opportunities that, in our view, remain untapped.
So explain to me, both of you, why is international law relevant for Palestinian refugees?
It's essential for Palestinian refugees as it sets out the rights they have as long as their situation is not resolved, including the institutions tasked to deal with their protection, UNRWA, but also UNHCR outside UNRWA's area of operation. And it furthermore provides the framework for pursuing the quest for durable solutions, which is often forgotten. We discussed the right and protection of Palestinian refugees as refugees, stateless persons, civilians in situations of armed conflict, and simply as human beings, and the complementary roles of UNRWA and UNHCR in making sure there is continuity of their protection, wherever Palestinian refugees find themselves. International law also sets out the parameters for the pursuit of durable solutions, the primacy of the rights of return, restitution and compensation, resulting from the unaddressed historical injustice perpetrated vis-à-vis the Palestinian refugees and Palestinians at large, and the norms and standards related to alternative solutions where refugees wish to pursue this.
Francesca, what's your take on this?
International law may allow to a correct understandings of the limitations that Palestinian refugees experience and fix them. Palestinian refugees fall under a myriad of different regimes, enjoying different statuses and treatment, including within the same countries, based on a variety of factors. But in practice, they do experience discrimination on various grounds. Sometimes the discrimination is more manifest. It's even called positive discrimination toward them in the Arab region in certain cases. Sometimes it's more obscure and muted. But eventually, these translate into limitation of enjoyment of fundamental rights. And this is to end. And for it to happen, what we need is awareness, 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 because this awareness can lead to proper action and hopefully correction.
As you say, it's comprehensive, but let me also say it's also 600 pages long. Do you really expect people to read this from cover to cover, or is it essentially a reference book?
Yeah, look, our intention was not to write a huge volume, but rather to comprehensively cover the question of the Palestinian refugees, as I said, in its wholeness. We have tried to rigorously research and document every key aspect of it. And given the fact that many of them are highly controversial, we have tried to ensure that each argument is solidly built and referenced. The book is written in a way that allows those interested in the Palestinian question to easily consult it. So yes, it's also made for those who do not want to read it cover to cover. I also trust that even media folks may find it easy to consult.
So, Francesca, given that there's been no serious talk about solutions or serious progress towards solutions for 70 years, given that with the advent of Donald Trump to the White House, there's even less likely to be one, surely you accept that this is mainly of academic interest and doesn't have, at the moment at least, sadly, very much of a practical implication?
The advent of Donald Trump at the White House and his deal of the century marks the lowest point ever with respect to solution that take into account the refugees' rights and aspirations. And as you know, this came on top of earlier measures by the Trump administration to do away with the refugee issues. Ultimately, the deal of the century and its masterminds have essentially embraced an extreme colonialist agenda, which paves the way for further annexations of Palestinian land, doing away not only with international law, but also with long-standing international consensus with respect to resolving the question of Palestine. These de facto obliterate the refugee issue, but will not make legal what remains illegal. It's this reality and the fact that doing nothing is not an option that has prompted us to think out of the box and definitely go beyond what would be merely descriptive, if I understand your question, I mean the academic in your question, or theoretical relevance. We do talk of a paradigm shift which is very, very concrete, not saying easy or immediately feasible, but we do propose a paradigm shift with respect to protection of Palestinian refugees, which is meant to also address the question of solutions for Palestinian refugees.
How would you apply it in the search for durable solutions, so-called, for Palestinian refugees?
First, we argue that the UN must reassume responsibility for the pursuit of solutions for Palestinian refugees, like they ultimately do for other refugee crises, including large and protracted ones. The UN should reassume its overall responsibility for the Palestinian refugee issue. Since Oslo, the Palestinian refugee issue has been dominated by the asymmetry of power between the parties, on top of political expedience at the expense of the interests of the refugee. And this situation must end. And as an extension of this, like with all other refugee situations, international law must once again be the framework and lighthouse for resolving the various aspects of the Palestinian refugee question. The issue of refugee status, as well as moral, material, individual, and collective aspects. We believe that the 2016 New York Declaration on Refugees and Migrants provides important new opportunities to re-engage the UN with respect to solutions for Palestinian refugees and for firmly placing this within an international law framework. The other element of our proposed paradigm shift, Chris, if I may, focuses on the Palestinian refugees themselves, as well as on Palestinian and Arab politicians. There has been a long-held belief that pursuing solutions for Palestinian refugees more holistically would undermine their rights and claims towards Israel, and as such, jeopardize the Palestinian cause. We make it abundantly clear in the book that this is not the case at all. The rights to return and to restitution and compensation flow from the historic injustice accompanying the birth of the refugee issue. And these have only become stronger with the passing of time and the further advancement of international law. Therefore, Palestinian refugees and their political advocates shouldn't fear pursuing solutions more closely aligned with the global international refugee regime, as many individual Palestinian refugees have done over the years and others demand.
But Lex or Francesca, given that what you've just talked about, Lex, is very much antithetical to the political aspirations of most Israelis and the way they view the Palestinians. They don't want the right of return implemented. They don't want to give up land. They don't want to give up property. Surely you accept that this is a book with a Palestinian and possibly, even though I'm not necessarily saying this, anti-Israeli agenda.
You know, the first edition of the book was praised for its objectivity, and we have aspired to maintain the same standard in the new book. Francesca.
Yeah, and also, if I may add on that, besides the partisanism that often characterizes the Israel-Palestine question, our most important aim has been to stimulate debate, Chris. Over time, the facts at the origins of the Palestinian refugee question and their legal consequences have somewhat disappeared. Of course, I'm not saying that for the Palestinians or for the scholars and activists mobilized for achieving justice in the Israel-Palestine question, but they have disappeared from the peace process and the wider political discourse with respect to the question of Palestine.
This is exactly why we're advocating for this fundamental paradigm shift and offer ideas to help move the discourse forward. You know, nothing could make us more happy than contributing in a modest way to breaking the current status quo and placing the pursuit of solutions once again more firmly within the parameters of international law.
That was Francesca Albanese. We were also joined by Lex Tackenberg. And let me say that their book, Palestinian Refugees in International Law, is published by Oxford University Press. This is me, Chris Gunness, saying goodbye.